Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Clean Energy Task Force and Oil and Gas Task Force session on methane and investor-owned utilities. I'm Joni Kresich. I'm a Northern Plains member in Livingston, Montana, and co-chair of Yellowstone Bend Citizens Council. And I'm going to be your host this afternoon. We'll get started soon, but we have to do our little technical housekeeping first. So make sure you're muted while our speaker is presenting. This really does help everyone hear better. Any technical troubles, just use the chat function. We have staff monitoring and they can help. Let's see, you can call 406-248-1154 or email tech@Northern Plains with any tech issues. We do recommend turning on speaker mode. That just seems to work better. In the top right corner of your screen, you'll see a little box that says view. You click there and then down, click on speaker. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation, so hold on to your questions until that time. When the Q&A starts, you'll be able to raise your hand with a question or enter it into the chat. Montana is at a crossroads. On the one fork, we have a smooth new roadway gliding through plains of tall grasses, sage, waves of yellow sweet clover. This road represents the opportunity to create a clean energy future, protecting our air, our water, ourselves, providing affordable power from wind and sun, creating new jobs, harnessing the technology and promise of the 21st century. Then the other fork, a rough and bumpy road full of potholes from decades of use. That road served its purpose well in the past, but it's simply not suited for the generations to come. This road represents Northwestern Energy's attempts to build up to 8 methane power plants while passing the financial risks on to energy customers, jeopardizing our health and our future. In this session, we're really so pleased that we'll be able to hear from Ann Hedges. Many of you know is the Director of Policy and Legislative Affairs at Montana Environmental Information Center. We're going to be hearing about the broader context of Northwestern Energy's attempts to build more methane plants in Montana. Take it away, Ann.
Thank you, Joni. Let me share my screen. It's so nice to see so many of you that I haven't seen in years. It really is just wonderful. Okay. How's that? And thank you. You know, we really appreciate the work that Northern Plains has been doing to help us, not just help us, but help prevent Northwestern Energy from building the gas plant in Laurel. It's just really, I feel like we are a fine-tuned machine. So I just want to say your staff is terrific, and I really like working with them. So we're going to talk today a little bit about investor-owned utilities and methane gas plants. And we'll get into the second half of this will be about Northwestern's proposal, but I just wanted to lay down some context for everybody so you know why investor-owned utilities are what they are and why they are so interested in this whole new generation of gas, this huge number of gas plants that utilities all over the country want to build. It is a problem, as you can imagine, and it is something that I think between Northern Plains, MEIC, and a lot of other folks, especially the really wonderful folks out in Laurel, that we have a shot at preventing Northwestern from moving forward with this plant. But let's start with why methane matters. And you've heard a lot about methane recently, and I know at Northern Plains you've heard about methane for many, many years because so many of your members live near oil and gas production. But right now, there has been a lot of research coming out in the very recent past that says that methane is the most important lever we can turn to change the path of global temperatures, in the next 10 years. And the reason for that is that methane is 86 times more powerful than CO2 at trapping heat in the atmosphere over a 20-year period. Now, methane falls out of the atmosphere faster than CO2. CO2 in 1,000 years, you still have about 19% of your CO2 in the atmosphere. Methane doesn't last as long, but it's far, far stronger at trapping heat. So if we can slash our methane emissions in the next decade or so, we are going to go a long way towards solving the climate crisis, or moving us at least in the right direction. And that's what the head of the IPCC said this last summer. So briefly, why monopolies? Why do we have utilities that are just monopolies? And it's because historically, there's competition between a very large number of small companies. There was a lot of overlap. There was a lot of chaos. There were prices that were way too high. And as a country, we decided that utilities provide essential services, and it's far too important to leave up to this hodgepodge, small overlapping. Can't see my words on the screen. Overlapping companies. So eventually they created something called territorial integrity, which allows a single monopoly to provide service in a particular territory. And in exchange for that, what they agreed to and what we agreed to is that they could be a monopoly, but they were subject to regulation by a utility commission. In this state, that's called the Montana Public Service Commission. So it is this need for electricity or for these services that utilities provide that caused us to move in this direction in the first place. And it's not that these monopolies are inherently bad. It is that they are monopolies, and that's what they do, but they are subject to regulation. And that's where the whole system can fall apart if you don't have regulators who are paying attention and representing the public interest. So there's really a couple different kinds of electric utilities. You have, as so many of you know, you have public power. You have co-ops, municipal utilities, utility districts. That's only about 25% across the country. But your investor-owned utilities are your big ones. That's about 75 of the utilities across the country. There are checks on monopolies. So you have all sorts of federal regulators who make sure that these monopolies are doing what they need to do in order for us to have the lights turn on, for us to have power that is safe and reliable. So there's this laundry list of acronyms. I'm happy to tell you what they all are, but a lot of them have to do with transmission and making sure that services are provided across regions or across a nation. But the checks on monopolies at the state level, cooperatives, it's really just the check is elections. But for IOUs, there's a number of checks. One, the primary check is the Montana Public Service Commission that oversees what the utility can charge customers, what it can build, what it can charge customers, like those of us who are in Northwestern Energy's electric service territory. You have the Montana Consumer Council, which is constitutionally created and is allowed to intervene in every docket of every monopoly utility that is regulated by the Public Service Commission. And then you have individual customers or groups. That's us. That's Northern Plains. It's MEIC. It is the entities that pay attention to what your Public Service Commission is doing and what decisions they're making, and engage in a whole variety of ways. So the problem with gas, and I'm using Energy Information Administration charts, and I'll just say, I hate the Energy Information Administration charts. Everything about the EIA is incredibly conservative and assumes no new technology will ever be developed and that we're going to continue on the same trajectories that we are on today. That is why the EIA is notoriously incorrect at predicting the future. But this is the future that they predict, and it simply can't be. So what they're saying is for oil and natural gas, you are going to see every year. So we're here 2020, this line here, where we're actually 2021. And all of these blue are the development of oil and gas and natural gas. I don't call it natural gas, it's methane gas. Natural gas is only natural when it's beneath the surface of the earth. Once it comes up, it's methane, and that's a problem. Because gas, natural gas, as they call it, is 86% or so of methane. And because methane is such a potent greenhouse gas, it's just important to just call it methane gas and not natural. Natural is what the industry calls it. Anyway, as you can see, there are a whole lot of gas plants that are proposed or expected in the next 20, 30 years. That is, it simply can't happen. But why do utilities like it so much? It's expensive. Really high capital costs mean that the utilities not only get to recover that capital cost, they get a rate of return on top of that. So let's just take a 10% rate of return, which is pretty normal. A utility gets 10% on every dollar it spends until it pays off that debt. So debt being the wrong word, but we'll use it for now. So if Northwestern's plant is predicted to last into the 2050s, between now and then, customers would be paying off the capital costs with an additional 10% guaranteed rate of return for the utility. Utilities love expensive projects. And then the expenses, things like fuel, which we all know can be super expensive and very volatile, fuel, routine maintenance and operation, and taxes, those are just straight pass-throughs. Utilities have to go to the Public Service Commission every year, but those are automatic pass-through costs. Regardless of how much fuel increases, you're going to see, unless a utility is being imprudent, you're going to see all of those costs automatically get passed through. So when Northwestern starts talking about, the Laurel gas plant, and it gives you the cost of that plant, all you're hearing about are those capital costs. You are not hearing about the annual cost to actually operate the facility. Another reason that these guys like gas is because they have a long history with their technology. And by and large, especially at Northwestern, it seems to be full of older gentlemen who want to continue doing things as they did in the last century. And they are not interested in these new technologies, new ways to do business that a lot of other utilities are embracing and moving forward with. Northwestern seems to be really stuck in the past. But inherently, they are comfortable with this type of technology. And they are inherently conservative and opposed to change. And that's true of every utility. They are required to keep the lights on. They are regulated by all those entities, that alphabet soup you saw in the previous slide. They have to make sure that the lights go on when we turn them on. And they get in trouble. They have fines if they don't. So they are very conservative. And then they have to answer to their shareholders, and their shareholders want them to make money, which means the more money that they can get in capital costs, they can spend in capital costs, the more money they're going to make for their shareholders. So while they're inherently conservative and opposed to change, they also are looking out for their shareholders and not their customers. So why the concern over methane? Here it is. Because methane has been increasing in the atmosphere. This is really similar to what a lot of you have seen for decades now, the Keeling curve for CO2. Methane emissions are really similar. They're increasing. But this is the slide that really gets me. I just think we all need to think about this slide every single day as we think about moving forward in our lives and how we are going to interact with methane gas in our homes and our businesses. So this is based upon a study that just came out in the journal Nature in September, and they did an analysis of what it would take for the world to stay below the 1.5 degree threshold that all the countries agreed to in the Paris Agreement. And they had done this study a few years back and they updated it recently. And this is what they found. For the United States, being the black line right here, those are the emission reductions, methane emission reductions we need to hit in the United States. On average, we have to decrease our methane emissions by 3% per year if we want to stay under the 1.5 degree threshold. And the real problem is we needed to have hit peak gas last year in 2020. So there is no time to lose. If we want to limit warming to what the experts in the world have said is necessary to maintain our standard, our way of life, we've got to get busy. We just don't have any time. I see this chart and I see that reduction, and it really, to me, it's a bit of a gut punch. So let's move into talking about Northwestern specifically. So Northwestern has been flirting with gas for quite some time now. In its 2015 resource procurement plan, it hit all of its modeling like it likes to do. Its plan really favored gas, and the PSC found that it was deeply flawed. And they said that they would almost certainly not be able to approve a resource based upon that 2015 plan because it wouldn't be in the public interest. So that was in 2015. Northwestern did another plan, and so many of you turned out, over 600 people across the state turned out at public hearings, obviously pre-COVID, and they really were so well versed in this topic, and they said, we don't want any more gas. We want Northwestern to model the closure of Colstrip. We want Northwestern to model increased reliance on renewables and storage. And we just simply don't want Northwestern to build a fleet of new gas plants. And the Public Service Commission also found that Northwestern's plan was deeply flawed. And it said that the deficiencies addressed above, which was a laundry list, are substantial enough that they call into question the adequacy, accuracy, and value of the 2019 plan. Now, these resource plans are what Northwestern is supposed to be using, or the Public Service Commission is supposed to use to analyze whether Northwestern, its additional resources like a gas plant, are appropriate, are really in the public interest. And what these plans have done have been so biased towards gas that they've been called out by the Public Service Commission, which a lot of you have been following the Public Service Commission. So they must have been really bad for the Public Service Commission to be so serious about it. And then when Northwestern put out the request for bids, asking companies to bid in to build its next resource, it requested those bids before the Public Service Commission had any input, and it designed the whole bidding process to favor methane gas. Surprise. So in May, Northwestern came forward. We found out that Northwestern has been talking to DEQ about this since last year, October 2020. But in May of 2021, Northwestern came to the Public Service Commission and asked for permission to build 175 megawatt gas plant on the banks of the Yellowstone River, just outside the boundaries of Laurel. You can see this is where the plant would be. And the plant would be 8 reciprocating internal combustion engines. They're called RICE units. It would operate until 2057 approximately. It received its air permit in August of 2021. They have not applied for any water discharge permits, no stormwater or MPDES permits yet, as of yesterday. And then the plant will be 300 feet from the Yellowstone River. And there's a lot of people who live on the other side of the river. And this plant is going to be really loud. So it's going to be 65 decibels. And remember, decibels are on a logarithmic scale. So the higher you go, the louder things become exponentially. So it's going to be 65 decibels, 600 feet away. Well, there's people who live 600 feet away. And Northwestern's attorney stood up at a hearing in Laurel last week and said, don't worry about it. 65 decibels is like somebody talking, like having a conversation. And the question really is, do you really want somebody following you around 24/7 talking in your ear? Because that's what this gas plant would do to the people who live nearby. And just as a side note, when we were fighting the highway generating station and were able to prevent the coal plant from going forward, we negotiated an agreement that allowed them to build a gas plant, but they agreed to a limit of 42 decibels at the plant boundary. And that was in 2010. So 65 decibels for the Laurel generating station is simply too loud. Another entity was willing to live with 42 decibels. Thankfully, that plant is not in use. This is a really rough graphic. I apologize for that. But talking about the pipeline, and pipelines were one of the places where Northwestern is really hiding the ball. So Northwestern is converting an old oil pipeline, the Byron pipeline, it's the purple line here, from Wyoming, and they're converting it into a natural gas pipeline. They're going to bring it up to Laurel, they're going to send it underneath the river, and they're going to hook into the site. And that has a lot of people concerned because pipelines leak. For one, they leak about 2.3% of their product each year. That's an awful lot of methane going into the air, unmitigated. And then there's the community has denied an easement across the park. It's a really lovely park in Laurel. Denied an easement twice. And what we just heard this morning is that the company has now approached a landowner and offered them not even that much money to sell out and sell his property and let them put a pipeline there instead, so they no longer would need the easement. It sounds like that is probably going to go forward, and there's not much we can do about it. So the victories we've had recently in preventing the town of Laurel, the city, from approving an easement across the park likely are not going to be enduring. Laurel's greenhouse gas emissions. So we have a plant that will probably, according to Northwestern, the plant itself will emit 769,000 tons of CO2 equivalent each year. So that's CO2e is really converting methane into the same thing as CO2, so that we can be comparing apples to apples. So it's about 750,000 tons of CO2 each year. And that does not include the extraction process. It doesn't include the pipelines that leak. So that's actually a really generous calculation for how much their emissions would be, because we know that there are fugitive emissions at the wellhead. We know that pipelines leak and that they vent. And when you have to fix a pipeline, they fix it and they vent methane into the atmosphere. We know that compressor stations are notorious for being leaky, and that they're going to need compressor stations along the route to move the gas through the pipeline. And all of that spells code red for humanity. That's what the IPCC said. We are in a crisis state. We simply cannot let these types of facilities move forward with these types of emission profiles. We'll skip that. So the cost of the plant, and just so you know, it's a lot more than what you're hearing. So they say the construction costs will be about $286 million. That's the money that they get, the 10% or the rate of return on. The Public Service Commission will eventually decide what that rate of return would look like. But it's not just the construction, it's the plant maintenance, it's the pipeline construction and maintenance. Northwestern has never told us how much it's going to cost to convert that pipeline. They're going to charge that to their gas customers instead of saying it's a part of this facility. That is sneaky. It artificially lowers the price tag of their plant, when in fact, you wouldn't have a plant unless they converted that pipeline. And then you have taxes and fees and interest, but most importantly, you have fuel. And we saw this week, the Public Service Commission put out a press release saying they expect gas prices this winter to increase by 47 to 62%. That is an amazing amount of increase. Gas is really volatile right now, and it's predicted to continue to be volatile for quite some time. A lot of utilities are looking to gas. There's going to be a shortage in the system. The United States exports an increasing amount of gas overseas. So we're in competition with the world. And so Northwestern lacks a fixed price contract for fuel, but it doesn't care, because whatever the fuel costs are, it gets to pass those on to customers if the Public Service Commission approves this construction cost when Northwestern comes back. So ultimately it pays to hide the ball. And that's what Northwestern has been doing. It only is talking about the construction costs. It refuses to talk about the pipeline costs, operation and maintenance, fuel costs. It's pretending like the construction cost is the only cost that matters in the cost of this plant for customers. And that's simply not true. But if they can manage to convince the Public Service Commission and the public that they should only focus on the $286 million, then they're going to make a lot of money. And there's so many good alternatives. There's energy efficiency and demand side management. Northwestern never considers these two simple mechanisms for saving, for preventing the need to build another gas plant. If they would really institute some serious demand side management and energy efficiency programs, we wouldn't be in this spot. Storage plus renewables, Northwestern got a lot of bids for storage plus renewables in its last, in this whole request for proposals, in which they chose, surprisingly, their own gas plant. And those developers were pretty upset. So they thought they had good bids, and Northwestern just simply didn't design its RFP to choose these modern resources. And then the other thing that probably is the most intriguing, as far as I'm concerned, that is under the radar, is regional cooperation. If this is what our utility system looks like now, you have all of this balkanized network where each utility is kind of doing its own thing. What happens when you start behaving like utilities do in the East, where you start sharing power across the grid, so that when the sun is shining in one place and not shining in another place, you can move power to that other place? Well, regionalization of the grid is really complex. I'm not going to lie about that. It's very complex, but there's a lot of benefit to moving in this direction. And Northwestern just entered the energy imbalance market in June. And that is where there's regional trading of small amounts of electricity, short-term small amounts. And within 2 weeks of joining the EIM, Northwestern received over $1 million in benefits, because there's so much savings that can be had by sharing power when one area has a lot and another area doesn't have enough. And if we could make a regional market, which a lot of people are working towards, where we could do this not just in the short term, but we could do it in the long term, we would decrease the need for new power plants all over the Western United States. So what can we do? The first thing we can do is prevent Laurel from rezoning the property. That is what Northern Plains and MEIC are really focused on at the moment. Trying to get noise and light limits on the plant operation. If it does get rezoned, we want to make sure that rezoning is done in a way that limits the harm that's going to be caused to the neighbors. We need to participate in every permitting process and PSC proceeding going forward, and we will be in touch. We'll be working with Northern Plains on that. You'll hear about it. And then when Northwestern comes back to the Public Service Commission to try and charge customers, we need to prevent that from happening. Northwestern is taking a huge risk by withdrawing from pre-approval in September, and they're going to build the plant and then come back to the Public Service Commission and ask the commission to charge customers those costs and to develop a rate of return for them. We will fight that. And then the other thing, last but not least, is you challenge them in court. And we filed this suit under the Montana Environmental Policy Act against DEQ for approving the air permit, because it didn't even consider the pipeline. There are so many things that air permit didn't consider, and the MEPA analysis didn't consider. I think we have a pretty good case, but lawsuits take a long time, so it's really a last resort. I think this preventing Laurel from rezoning the property is first on the priority list. So that's all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if you have any more information that you want, please feel free to contact me. This is my cell phone. You can always catch me on my cell phone, or you can email me. And that's all I have.
Wow, what an impressive presentation, Anne. We are so lucky to have your amassed knowledge. I know you've spent decades working to understand these complicated things that make us perfect partners, because we can't operate on the grassroots level without this kind of knowledge, and you're such a good translator. So thank you so much. We are going to take questions now. If you use the raise hand function, you can find it at the bottom of the screen, then click on reactions, and then select raise hand. Then we'll just start taking those questions.
Can I answer one question? I'm sorry, I'm looking at in the chat, and I think it's just so important. And sure. I can't emphasize this enough. And that's from Mark Nicholson. That because we're seeing a pinch in the market for methane gas, there's more demand than there is product. There is going to be, we're coming to the point where you are going to start seeing, we've already seen it, decisions having to be made about what we're going to do with that gas. And if we don't have enough, what comes offline first? So this methane gas plant is to generate electricity. It's really important to make sure that people's heat stays on in the middle of winter. There is a tension between those two things. We already have interruptible gas supply in this state for a lot of major industrials. You know, they're not going to get their gas when they need it if there is a tension between whether humans have it to heat their buildings or whether we need it for industrial use. We're going to run into the same problem if we keep increasingly rely on gas to generate electricity, when, you know, the more urgent need really is gas to heat people's homes. So I think that is really a really smart question. And it's something to keep in mind. When you have a short supply, who's going to lose? And it's going to be the electric sector.
All right, thank you so much. I think Ed Glick has a question. Ed?
Thanks, Ed. It's really good to see a lot of the visuals to help really give understanding to this proposed plant. So I appreciate that. And question I have it relates to the 2019 resource procurement plan that Northwestern Energy had. That was the first plan that I paid close attention to. And that was where they were, proposing 8 plants, and it was just for amount of capacity, way more than we need in this state. And again, it also didn't no effort at efficiency or anything like that. But I think it was hard to argue the point when they kept on saying our model says this and that. It was this little black box, right? And it wasn't until the PSC staff cracked open that box and saw what the assumptions were that it was totally rigged for them to conclude that they needed to have gas plants. I think that's fraud. That's absolutely fraud. I don't know if it meets a legal definition of fraud in terms of that being a plan, but I think it is pure. It's absolutely they were deliberately trying to deceive the public on what the needs were for our power generation in the future, and what the solution is. Are you aware of any sort of legal approach that can address this fraudulent activity?
No, I completely 100% agree with you. And Northwestern is consistently, every time it does a resource plan, it hides the modeling data from the public, from the utility, and it didn't give all of its modeling information to the Public Service Commission. the Public Service Commission hired a company called Synapse, who was able to look a little tiny bit under the hood. So they got to raise the hood a couple inches. They could not put the hood all the way up. And what they could see is what we heard from the Public Service Commission in criticism of the plan. Northwestern will not disclose its modeling because it rigs its modeling in favor of the most expensive resources. That's how it makes money. But I will say that Northwestern is starting right now. It's starting its next resource plan. And it has set up a website where they will take public input on that plan. And so you can go to Northwestern Energy's website, look up their resource procurement plan page, and submit comments that they need to show their homework, that they need to model renewables plus storage. They need to model what the whole system would look like without Colstrip, because every other utility out of state wants out of Colstrip by the end of 2025. What does that mean for us? We deserve to know. We need Northwestern to do a better job. I will say that they have opened up those meetings in which they're going to be developing that resource procurement plan, so it will no longer be something that the public can't observe. And I'm really happy about that. I think that will be helpful. But ultimately, the power lies with the Public Service Commission. And anybody who has Tony O'Donnell is in Tony O'Donnell's district, you should call him up. And you should say, how come Northwestern is not providing its math? It's telling us it has this crisis, but it's not showing anyone why it has a crisis. It's just saying it. And I don't care what they say. I want to see the numbers. Our public service commissioners are the ones who get to decide whether those resource plans are accurate and whether they matter when Northwestern brings in a resource. So I think that it's up to us to lobby the Public Service Commission as much as we can.
Okay, well, thank you. We're going to, we intend to. We're ready for that. Okay, we have Larry Bean next, but I want to give you the order that's coming up. Rob and Lori Byron have a question, Maggie Beeson, Carol Mick, and then Jeannie. So let's go to Larry first.
Thanks for the nice presentation, Ann. Hey, make sure I got a number right there. I've been using the wrong number. 796,000 tons a year coming out of the plant. And just my layman's comparison, this is about like putting one coal strip unit right in the middle of Yellowstone County. And maybe Lori's going to ask this question too, but I live downwind from that, and it strikes me no one's really kind of put any numbers to, those of us who live here, that have skin in the game, health issues, lost days of just enjoying ourselves, going golfing and everything, that it's taking a lot away from us in a lot of different ways. So maybe just mention that. And then secondly, the frustration of having to deal with this without any real outlet to comment to anybody. And maybe you've laid out a little bit there, but just completely lost how a citizen can have a voice in this.
It's, we are talking to Northern Plains staff people about this nearly every day because it is a challenge. I mean, when Northwestern, we had put at MEIC a ton of resources into the pre-approval process. So we had hired experts and we were a week away from having all of the expert testimonies submitted. And then they pulled the plug out and they said, we're going to build it anyway and hope that it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Because everybody, including the major industrials, opposed Northwestern's proposal. So without the Public Service Commission's pre-approval, ironically, we're limited. So we were left with DEQ and the local government being the only levers we can turn. And the local government has, you raise air pollution issues. They have expressed concern. A lot of the folks in the community have expressed concern, but most of those folks in the community didn't even know this was happening. Those folks in the community, do you know that Northwestern, or not Northwestern, but the city of Laurel was advertising in the Huntley paper for the zoning meetings and the Board of Adjustments? They weren't advertising in the Laurel Outlook or the Billings Gazette. They were advertising in the Laurel paper or the Huntley paper 30 miles away. So nobody knew this was happening. And that's just Northwestern's MO, is to hide the ball. And so I think the most important stuff we can do right now is raise the level of awareness, getting people knowledgeable about the emissions. And we have a fact sheet, Northern Plains has it, and I don't know if they have adjusted it to with their logo or whatever, but there is a fact sheet that has all your air emissions on it. It talks about these noise levels. We need to distribute that, and we really need letters to the editor. And if you know anyone who lives in Laurel, they need to show up at the commission meeting this week on Tuesday night and tell the commission to not rezone this property right now until they have an investigation and are able to better answer the questions this whole thing raises, because Northwestern has been giving very inconsistent data to the state, to Laurel, to the Public Service Commission. And so nobody is really exactly sure what the real numbers are. And Northwestern is getting called on it by some of the folks in Laurel. So supporting them by showing up if you live in that area, or writing letters to the editor to help people learn that this is still a thing. That's my only advice.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the question, Larry, and thanks, Anne. I think that Lori Byron is next.
Hi, thanks as always, Anne. So the report that 350 and Sierra commissioned to look at whether or not it's feasible for Northwest to use renewable energy with battery storage to meet all the needs of these upcoming plants. Are you satisfied with that study? That's something we can quote and we can use? Absolutely.
I mean, there's no one way to get to decarbonization. There's all sorts of ways to get there. And that is one realistic method of doing so. So absolutely, showing that it can be done. Maybe that's not exactly the path Northwestern wants to take, but if they're required to, they're going to figure it out because the option is available to them. And I just want to do a shout out to Rob and Lori. If you guys haven't seen, we have a video up on our YouTube site in which we did a presentation on methane gas, and they did half of the presentation on methane and health. Larry, and they did a really, really awesome job of talking about methane gas from cradle to grave and its impacts on public health. Lori, you're on mute. Yeah, so just a shout out to them, and I urge you to look at it because it's got a lot of really great stuff in it. I learned a lot listening to it.
Okay, Lori, does that, you're back on mute, so I think that you've gotten your question answered, and thank you for all the work that you and Rob are doing. As Anne says, Rob and Lori Byron are really working hard. Lori, maybe you can put your group in the chat that you're working with the Montana Health Professionals group, so people will know that you're doing that work. Carol, Maggie Beeson is next, and then Carol Mick.
Hi, Anne. Thank you very much for your presentation and all the great work you're doing. I'm just interested in the Public Service Commission. You know, it seems sort of, what is their motivation? I mean, I think we all have ideas about it, but knowing a little bit more about how we could best approach them, and you probably have that understanding.
Yeah. First off, I just want to say Tuesday's meeting before the Laurel City Commission is not canceled, and we can talk about that. I see somebody put that in the chat. But the Public Service Commission, boy, what a complicated entity that is. For all of you in Billings, Tony O'Donnell represents you. He's a nice guy. He will pick up the phone if you call. And I think they need to hear from people. They don't. They hear from utilities. And the arguments that work with them are not the arguments that are driving us in our hearts. Tony O'Donnell doesn't believe in climate change, or at least human caused climate change. So I wouldn't lead with that. But he does care about money. He does care about customers' bills. And he is worried about the tension that we just talked about between gas used for home heating and using gas for electricity. So this is a really expensive plant, and that will resonate with him and all other commissioners. And we have a gas problem in this country. As far as I think it's good, but there is not enough gas to do everything that all these utilities want to use it for. And hammering that home with Tony would be a really good idea.
Okay, that's really helpful. I think all of us, we're activists, and we just need to know a little bit of direction about where our activism can be most powerful. So this is such a good discussion. I think we're on to Carol Mick and then Jeannie.
Yeah, I have just something that came kind of stupid across the grapevine, that an energy person said, well, we need to just decrease the amount of cattle in our ag to decrease methane, which oh boy, whew, that just goes another top knot. But then my concern is, if the customers keep having to pay more for this, customers' income is limited, and there's so much being property taxes are increasing, everything's. Are we going to push our customers out of their homes and add to another major problem, homelessness? That's a thing that I think might be down the road. The other thing is if Northwestern Energy kind of gets their handle into this and don't get stopped, is there some way we can see where we can meet them on the ground elsewhere? Like, do they have to do certain things to do business in Montana? Can we hold them to that? If they're using public highways, can we get them to, in other words, sabotage them anywhere we can?
Well,
we have to be activists here, really activists, because these guys are trying to take over our whole state.
Right. I like the way you're thinking. I think first things first, let's raise people's knowledge about what's going on, who Northwestern is, that they're greedy pigs who just want to earn a lot of money. And so what you said at the first part, I'd like you to turn that into a letter to the editor. I'd like to be able to share that on social media. We need that out there. We need to tarnish Northwestern's reputation, because they go and they give money for, school playground equipment and a couple $1,000s here and a couple $1,000s there, and communities think, aren't they nice? So we need to let people know who they really are. And so it's really, really important, especially right now, to get those types of letters in and share them on social media. Beyond that, I love activism. I love activism. And I think that we're trying to develop those strategies now, working with Northern Plains, trying to do that. There's no obvious tactic other than right now we're completely focused on the zoning thing. And I want to make sure we have time to talk about that a little bit. I'd like to give you guys an update in case you don't know the latest.
One more thing I'd like to say, if anybody wants to take that issue and put it into a letter to the editor, please do, because every letter I ever wrote to the editor gets circular filed. I've been too much of an activist, I think. They just don't like to hear me.
Okay, thank you so much, Carol.
Okay.
People, the committee that I'm going to be talking about shortly, that's been created to fight this plant, is ready to support people with letters, kind of draft letters to the editor. So Carol, you can reach out to me and others on this call. So we need to get a flurry of those. I would like to see, for instance, here in my small town of Livingston, about a letter every 2 weeks ongoing until we stop this thing. And hopefully that's going to be happening everywhere. I think, let's see, I think Oh, Edward Barta has a question, and then last of all, Jeannie. So 2 more, that's it. Thank you so much for all of your great questions and for this discussion. So we'll go to Edward.
Thank you. Very nice presentation. Well, I have a friend who lives in Laurel, and he's pretty. He reads the Laurel newspaper pretty regularly, and he says that unquestionably the numbers of editorials that go into that paper are in opposition to that plant, which I find really good to know. So my question is: it seemed like the Tuesday meeting is going to be pretty pivotal, needless to say, and I'm just kind of wondering: do you know very much about the specifics about the way that meeting is going to be run? Is there going to be a venue that allows for a lot of people to attend? Are the people who are going to be speaking against it? Do they have like a good talking points to really focus in and be effective in their presentation? And then I'd like to think that a city council can really have the power to rise up in opposition to this plant, particularly against Northwest Energy. I'm not hopeful about that, but I would just like to see what your take is on what you think might happen on Tuesday.
It's complicated, and it got more complicated this week, and it got really complicated yesterday morning. So they were set to have a vote on Tuesday night. Last week on Tuesday night, the mayor decided they were going to form a special committee to investigate the plant and all the inconsistencies. And she was talking about that committee not even meeting until after the holidays. And so that was going to take a while. But then she heard from her engineer and her city attorney, who said they can't do that. They're wrong. She can do that, but they have to follow a process in doing that. So yesterday afternoon, Earth Justice, who was been working with MEIC, and I know with Northern Plains for years, they sent a letter to the city commission that said, you absolutely can form this committee, but once the committee is finished with its work, it's got to be an advisory committee, and then you have to start the process and go through the zoning board / planning board before the city can vote on it. So it would start the clock all over again. They'd have to start at the beginning, but having an investigatory advisory committee is possible and a good idea. What we're arguing for Tuesday night is that the city council agree to form this committee and send this back to the zoning board / planning board to take the recommendations of the committee and reconsider this. We need to start the process over again because nobody knew about it. They advertised it in the Huntley paper. So we're arguing for that. We don't know what they're going to do, but here's their problem. They have a vote problem. So they have one commissioner who hasn't shown up since August. They have another commissioner who, they have their mayor who died. So Emily Eaton stepped into the mayor's role. So her seat is currently empty. And their rules say they have to get 5 votes in order to approve a zone change. So there's 9 folks. You have 2 empty seats, and there have been some people who've been pretty opposed to the easement who are likely to also be opposed to the rezoning. So they're going to have a problem getting the numbers. And I think there's I think the commissioners are looking for an out. Somebody else to do some of this work, and that's why they wanted the commission. And so I think the commission is still an option. We are arguing Tuesday night for that commission, if that makes sense. It got complicated.
And so who would decide who will be on that commission? Would that be the mayor or the city council? Who decides how that commission will be made up?
Good question. And the mayor was just taking volunteers last week. She asked commissioners who wanted to be on it, and you had about 4 of them raise their hand. She asked people in the audience who wanted to be on it, and a bunch of them raised their hands. Northwestern didn't even bother to show up, so they didn't even raise their hand. But I think it would be a pretty good size body of people. That was how it was approached, at least initially. But we haven't seen their agenda yet for Tuesday night, so we're not quite sure how they're going to deal with all this.
All
Thank you.
right. Wow, this is really it demonstrates once again, Anne and everybody, how quickly things change and how necessary it is for us to be able to pivot. Thank you just so very much, Anne. I want to take the floor, if you're okay with that, Anne, if you have no, so that we can conclude on time and make sure that I get people connected to an action, because that's what we're all about. I'm going to repeat a little bit, but I think it's good to remember exactly the kind of tricky stuff that's going on. It's hard to follow and confusing, and we're all learning how to do that. So Northwestern Energy announced in May that they were going to build what they called the Laurel generating station. They said it was in response to need for more power capacity. You heard Anne say that there were a huge number, Anne, I can't remember, something like 180 proposals. Many of them did, when going back, did involve clean energy and storage. They're not interested in any of that. So they said this station was going to be natural gas. They love that word, and we know that's methane. This set Northern Plains members on alert. Natural gas is just a rosy way of saying methane. And Anne just taught us again, showed us again how devastating methane is in terms of climate. So Northwestern Energy asked for pre-approval from the Public Service Commission. And that just means they say, you guarantee us anything upfront that ratepayers, like all of us, are going to pay later. We're not going to tell you all the costs, and pre-approval also cuts us out of the public input process, which is anti-democratic and really a bad thing. Well, okay, then everybody gets to work on stopping pre-approval. And guess what? In September, Northwestern Energy just pulled their application for pre-approval and said, gosh, we don't really need any approval. We're speeding up construction. And as Anne mentioned, they're planning to get that plant up and running in 2023. And once again, we're cut out of any input. That's all of us, everybody. We're all using energy. So we don't have any say in whether or not this plant is going to be built, except for the ways that Anne is trying to help us see. So the time is to act is now. We do have a committee that formed with Northern Plains, 2 different task forces. We're working hard to just really get the word out, because Northwestern Energy has over 300,000 customers. We need to do a public education campaign, because many of those people are not going to like this idea, and we have to get to them and get them to get to Northwestern Energy and to the Public Service Commission. So the time to act is now. We have to be very loud in telling Northwestern Energy, no, we are not going to pay for a plant that has huge financial risks for all of us. At the same time, it's threatening our health and our future. We do deserve a fair, reliable, sustainable source of power that protects people and places we love. So you can follow the link on the screen and in the chat, and please do sign our petition telling Northwestern Energy we will not pay to harm ourselves and the planet. And then again, if you would like help with letters to the editor, you can contact me or any of the staff at Northern Plains. So thank you, everybody. I think Sydney is putting the link in the chat. There it is. So I hope everybody will sign that petition right now. It's a beginning. We intend to see this fight all the way through. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Anne for an incredible presentation. All your questions were so engaging.